You are born inside a structure taller than most mountains, and there's a good chance you'll die inside it too. The air outside is poison. The ground outside is dead. So this isn't just where you live, it's the entire world you get. And every hive, no matter how independent it feels from the top, exists to pay one specific debt on a schedule. It doesn't control a tithe, owed straight to the Imperium. We'll get to what happens the year that debt doesn't get paid. Let's go through what your life actually looks like, from the top floor all the way down to whatever's buried underneath the hive that started all of this. You already have a name that means something before you can talk. Your family runs one of the great houses, and everything below you exists in some way to keep that name in charge. You grow up in gardens lit by lamps, built to mimic a sun you'll rarely see for real. Your food comes from agri-worlds you'll never set foot on, shipped in specifically for people like you. Even the air is yours alone, pulled clean and scented straight from intake towers high above the smog line before it's ever touched a single lung below you. You're taught by private tutors, not in a room full of other kids, because most of the kids in your life aren't friends, they're the children of rival houses, and you're all learning that early. You'll probably never see the Underhive with your own eyes, not because you're forbidden, because there's simply no reason for you to ever go there. Your life looks completely different. If your family manages a manufactorum or serves a noble house directly, you get real windows. You get power on a schedule you can actually count on, most days. You can walk to your own front door without an escort. Breakfast is usually real food, not something reconstituted. But your career was decided the day you were born. You'll do what your father did, live roughly where your father lived, and you'll be reminded constantly and specifically exactly how far the fall is if you ever slip. This is where you probably actually live. 90% of everyone born in this hive will spend their entire life on this level or close to it, so it's worth slowing down here. You don't wake up to daylight, because there isn't any. You wake up to the shift light, a bank of heavy industrial lamps that switch on and off every 8 or 12 hours, and that's your entire calendar. Morning isn't a color in the sky. Morning is a light turning on. Your day starts with a shift horn, not an alarm you set for yourself. You get up in a hab block stacked with 100 families just like yours, and you queue for rations before your shift starts. Because if you queue after, there might not be enough left. That ration block is dense, salty, and doesn't taste like much of anything, and you learn early not to ask what's actually in it. Nobody says it out loud, but everybody knows the recycling program doesn't waste biomass. A worker who dies on one shift becomes part of what the next shift eats. It's just called corpse starch, and it's the reason nobody down here talks about lunch the way people talk about it anywhere else. The water isn't much better. Nothing that comes out of your tap was ever shipped in from outside. It's the same water this hive has had for 10,000 years, recycled through sweat, waste, and industrial runoff so many times that by the time it reaches your level, it comes out with a sharp metallic taste you stopped noticing years ago. You work a station on a line that never fully stops building weapon parts, void suit components, whatever quota the administratum has set for your hive this cycle. And that quota isn't your boss's number. It's the Imperium's. Every hive world owes a tithe, and it isn't paid in coin, it's paid in weapons, ammunition, and people. Whole regiments of guardsmen drafted straight off levels like yours. Miss that tithe badly enough, and it isn't your overseer who shows up next. It's Imperial fleet ships in orbit and space marines on the ground, and martial law that doesn't ask which family is to blame. So the quota isn't optional, and if your block falls behind, enforcers walk the line, a public beating on the factory floor, or somebody hauled off and never seen working again, usually enough to make sure the next shift doesn't fall behind the same way. You'll probably marry someone from your own block, because that's who you ever meet. Your friends are the kids you grew up queuing next to. If you get hurt on the line, you go to an overseer, not a doctor. And whether you get real treatment depends on how replaceable you are that particular week. Sometimes you sleep in shifts. Because the bunk isn't always yours, someone else uses it while you're on the floor. Your kids grow up watching that same light decide when you come home. Some of them will never see actual sunlight in their entire life. This is what billions of people actually live, generation after generation, and it barely changes. Here's something you probably don't think about while you're standing on that line. The noble houses above you don't just rule quietly. Those families compete constantly for trade contracts, for manufactorum output, for influence with the wider Imperium, and that competition doesn't always stay in council chambers. Sometimes money and weapons move downward, funding gangs far below that the houses would never publicly admit to controlling. People die in those fights without ever knowing whose argument they were actually settling. You'll see exactly what that looks like once we go further down. This is where you go if your family missed a quota, lost a work permit, or simply ran out of room as the hive kept growing around you. Whole sections down here used to be manufactorum blocks too, until they were sealed off instead of repaired. Part of that isn't neglect, it's weight. A hive this tall never actually stops pressing down. The spire and the upper levels are so heavy that the lower structure sinks a little more every year, inches at a time, and nobody down here sleeps without hearing the building groan and settle around them. Most of the time, it's just noise. Sometimes it isn't, and a whole block goes down at once with no warning. You walk past a school with the desks still bolted to the floor, empty for decades. There are elevator shafts you're not supposed to use anymore, because nobody's certain the cables or the floor underneath them will still hold. Old transit lines that used to move thousands of workers a day now move nobody, because the tunnel further along collapsed before you were even born. Power flickers instead of running on schedule. In some blocks, water gets filtered by hand because the pipes stopped being anyone's official job to maintain. Moving back up is possible. It happens. But it's rare enough that most people down here stop expecting it for themselves and start hoping for it for their kids instead. This is what's left of the original ground the whole hive was built on, buried now under centuries of construction stacked on top of it. You learn the shape of your world fast. Whole districts collapsed generations ago and were never cleared, just built over and abandoned. There are rivers down here, but you don't drink from them raw. Everything that leaks out of the levels above eventually settles into them. You learn which tunnels belong to which gang before you learn to read, because getting that wrong can get you killed. You learn to listen for things moving in the dark that aren't people at all, things that adapted to the Underhive long before your family ever did. And the most dangerous part of the Underhive isn't the gangs or the things in the tunnels. It's the promises. When you've gone 50 years without seeing a sunrise, someone offering you a family that actually wants you, or whispering about a patron who can fix everything if you just listen, that doesn't sound insane anymore. It sounds like the first good thing that's happened to you in years. Some of those preachers are running chaos cults, feeding on exactly that kind of hopelessness. Others are worse, a pure strain horror hiding at the center of a family that's slowly turning half the block into something that isn't human anymore, one relative at a time, until a genestealer brood is running an entire district and nobody above ever finds out until it's too late. In a Hive City, hope is usually the fastest way to get noticed by exactly the wrong thing. Family isn't just blood down here, it's whoever's in your gang, whoever shares your tunnel, whoever you trust to watch your back in the dark. Life expectancy is brutal, and everyone down here knows it. And people still have children, still build homes out of scrap, still hold their piece of territory because it's theirs. This is also where most of that house-funded gang warfare actually plays out. The people fighting and dying down here are, most of the time, paying the price for a rivalry between families who live kilometers above them and will never once set foot down here in their lives. Go deeper than the Underhive, and there's a floor even the gangs try to avoid the Sump. It's not tunnels anymore at that point, it's a lake. fed by centuries of runoff and chemical waste draining down from every level above. Nobody chooses the Sump. You end up there when every other level has already thrown you out. Here's the truth that every level of the Hive quietly runs on. No matter where you're born into it, work hard, hit your quota, stay loyal to your block, and things can get better. Sometimes it's even true. Families do climb a level. People do escape the Underhive entirely. It happens often enough that everyone keeps believing it could happen to them. And in the middle of all of it, the poisoned air outside, the quotas, the gang wars nobody down here chose, billions of people are still living full lives. They fall in love with the person working next to them, on the line. They tell their kids stories about levels they'll probably never see themselves. They hold on to whatever piece of the Hive is theirs, and they keep going. Most people born inside a Hive City never learn how tall it really is. They spend their entire lives somewhere in the middle, working to support people they'll never meet, standing on top of generations who came before them and were already forgotten. And if you live your whole life here and never once leave, you'll have lived it exactly the way billions before you did, inside the only world you were ever given. Comment question: which layer do you think you'd actually survive in?